Okay, Alberto, so nice to see you and thank you for joining me today to have a chat. How are you doing?
A pleasure as ever. Doing well.
Good. So today, thank you for coming on to the Zoom to talk a little bit about the conference that you had organized. And I just wanted to use this opportunity to kind of like maybe wrap up the conference that you had organized and maybe get your thoughts on the conference. So tell us what you had organized and when it happened and just give us a brief idea of what you did.
Okay, so the conference I co-organized with Benjamin Bryce, who's at UBC, director of UBC Latin American Studies, and a historian and graduate student from Valparaiso, Andres Cabrera, who came here for the conference and who was also really instrumental, vital in getting the participation of our two main speakers. So the two speakers who we invited from Chile were Elisa Loncon and Fernando Pedican. So Elisa Loncon was the president of the Constitutional Convention, or the first president of the Constitutional Convention that was a product of the social movements of 2019 and the referendum on the back of that led to the process, the constituent process to try to draw up a new constitution that would replace the 1980 constitution, of course, a constitution that had been imposed in a sense during the first half of the Pinochet dictatorship that went from 1973.
Oh,
The other speaker, yeah.
So why organize it now? Was there a
Yeah.
particular reason?
So it's the 50th anniversary, or it was the 50th anniversary on September 11th, 2023, 50th anniversary of the coup in Chile that brought down the Unidad Popular government of Salvador Allende, and then, of course, led to a massive wave of repression, disappearances, jailings, and that obliterated this popular experiment in democratic socialism, basically, in Latin America, and which, of course, was preceded by other such dictatorships, right, in Brazil, and followed by dictatorships also in Argentina in the 70s. So the idea for the conference was, of course, to mark this anniversary. But since also keeping in mind that that Vancouver has a lively and active Chilean diaspora who also organize events, including one which I believe is coming up in about 5 days. There's an event on October 15th. Ben, Andres, and I tried to think of what would be a different way of marking this anniversary, and also of thinking of how to recognize and how to bring into dialogue with things happening over here all of the movements that have tried, especially over the past decade or two, to reverse the many negative legacies of the Pinochet dictatorship, including the particular ways in which it implemented a particularly severe form of neoliberalism, and also, and this was then ended up being the focus of the conference, it's further curtailing and of indigenous rights and continued role in the dispossession of indigenous people, including the largest group from whom both of our speakers, keynote speakers, hailed the Mapuche. So we thought that inviting Elisa Loncon, who is probably the most prominent, at least internationally prominent, Mapuche political figure, a linguist by training, but as I said, president of this constitutional convention, and Fernando Pedican, who's a young Mapuche historian of Mapuche resistance and political movements, especially in the 19th century, 20th, and to the present, that, to bring this question of the place of indigenous politics in efforts to reverse the legacies of the coup and the dictatorship was also, of course, of particular interest and pertinence here in view of parallel, let's say, movements of indigenous resurgence and political debates around that. In fact, then also as was evident in Fernando Padican's talk, even a lot of the forms of activism and resistance, including things like blockades against extractivist projects, etc., bear a lot of analogies and similarities, perhaps, even though, of course, the histories are quite different. The forms of settlement are quite different, etc. So the idea was to bring this together as a different, but also really crucial angle to thinking about this legacy, also because it had been such a transformative process in Chile for this constitutional convention, which of course was alas defeated in the second referendum that repudiated it. But nevertheless, the constitutional convention really put indigenous voices, including that of Elisa Loncón, but also of 17, I believe, of the 100 and some members of the Constituent Assembly were from the Mapuche and the other indigenous peoples of Chile. And then we also had within the conference, Andrés Cabrera, co-organizer, presenting some of the political and historical context and the role of indigenous and Mapuche politics in this constitutional process. And then a scholar, indigenous scholar from Allard Law School, Professor Johnny Mack, who also brought to bear his own perspectives on the question of indigenous law, constitutional processes, and forms of indigenous resurgence and politics.
Yeah, no, I had the pleasure of attending one of the sessions, or actually one day of the weekend, the 2-day conference, and I found it quite, intellectually stimulating, and also just very amazing that here you have this Mapuche leader and participant in the Constitutional Convention right there in front of us. So I thought that was pretty amazing. So thank you so much for bringing that to Vancouver. I'm wondering so that was my kind of like highlight or what obviously it was a big event and it happened over a few days. But was there one thing that you felt that you would take away, or that's most memorable about the event? Is there something that you could share with us about whether it be scholarship or whether it be kind of political mobilizing? Is there one thing that stands out for you?
Well, I think I was, like yourself, very very fortunate and very happy to listen to Elisa Loncón and to somebody who had known of and kind of admired from afar for a period. In fact, I think she had all sorts of these very public accolades of Times 100 top women politicians in the world, that kind of thing. And she's really, I think what probably personally what I got most out of were the one-on-one kind of conversations as usual, right? Like in and around the conference, and getting some of her perspectives on this process, on her own, also struggles. I mean, she's been unsurprisingly the object of fairly concerted attacks from a very very bullish far right in Chile, which of course has very anti-indigenous as well as anti-feminist and other politics. One thing that I was really pleased about, which I guess didn't feature in the conference as such, but that she got to have a really her and Fernando Padican had a sustained long meeting with the one of the directors of Indigenous Studies at SFU, Professor Eldon Yellowhorn, who is also a linguist, but he's also an archaeologist. And so apparently, unfortunately, I couldn't make it because I had other commitments, but apparently they had a very fruitful discussion about questions of indigenous archaeology. And the fact that this is something that apparently is not yet present in terms of Mapuche academic practice and scholarship, like the the departments of history maybe and of politics have opened up more to indigenous perspectives, but developing indigenous methodologies in archaeology, something that's still kind of new to them. So that was something that they were looking forward to exploring further. So just making, like the fact that those connections were made was, I thought, a very positive thing. And in a sense, the purpose, part of the purpose, as well as to mark the anniversary and bring these really important voices to speak here, was also to give them the possibility to make their own contacts with indigenous communities and scholars, which they also did, as well as with the Chilean community. And I suppose the response from them was really fabulous, and that felt very good as well. They were very pleased to have such a crucial and inspiring political figure from their country be here in Vancouver and be part of these events to commemorate this moment, and of course all of the, not just to commemorate it, but to think about all of these forms of struggle and activism that are still responding to it. So
of course, well, that sounds great. I mean, that's the scholarship, the exchange of intellectual ideas, that sounds great, and also the mobilizing, and then also connecting with the community. So I guess you hit a home run. It sounds like it was a great event. Or a great outcome in terms of the conference. Just as a final question, I may be putting you on the spot here, but what are potential future things that you might think of doing in this area? Is there some, is there going to be a part 2? Do you have any ideas in terms of the movement of these constitutional reforms? Will there be another conference next year? I'm just curious if there are any thoughts about the future. Especially things arising coming out of the conference, or a publication,
we haven't really kind of come together to to debrief, or come together and apart as on Zoom or whatever to debrief about the steps forward. I think they both Fernando and Elisa very much wanted to continue these contacts, which they found quite fruitful. And so it really sort of depends also on them, right? This is one of those curious things where though I have my own personal and intellectual links with Chile, I'm not at all a scholar of the region. I'm certainly not a scholar of indigenous politics. So in some sense, I'm happy to just be a relay or conduit for what they'd like to organize. Personally, and this is more in terms of my own collaboration with Andres Cabrera, who's a doctoral student of mine as well as a co-organizer. I've been trying to wrap my head around the specific forms taken by this right-wing reaction to the constitutional process, including its indigenous moment, and the way this plays out in a broader kind of map of these phenomena, both in Latin America and elsewhere. So that's probably personally what I would want to try and study further, right? Because at present, everything that was kind of hopeful and emancipatory about the Constitutional Convention itself has been very much blocked by this defeat. There's now another constitutional process, which is not with popular participation, but is really sort of top down via the Congress, which is dominated by the right and far right. But when I spoke to our Chilean guests, they all thought that actually this constitutional convention might, this third referendum, so to speak, might also fail, so that they might just be stuck with this kind of zombie Pinochet constitution, because in fact the constitution that the far right is trying to put in might even be worse than the 1981, right? And then there you have this very kind of ambivalent situation where you have a lot of really interesting political mobilization by feminists, by indigenous movements, by popular society, but also in Chile you have a massive level of depoliticization, right? So the turnouts were for elections are terrible. A lot of the negative vote for the referendum apparently also had to do with the fact that people had to vote for the referendum, so they sort of resented it and voted against it just on that basis. So yeah, it's quite complicated, but I definitely like to maintain my connections with scholars there, because I think it's both a really important and interesting place where people are really doing novel things, right? And the Constitution itself as a document is a pretty remarkable text. I mean, many people have seen it as, at least as a draft, right, as like one of the most, not just progressive, but multi-dimensional kind of constitutions, taking into account, rights of nature and indigenous perspectives and social rights, etc., in a way that was much more comprehensive, right, than many of the constitutions that we know. So I think it's not, even though it was defeated, I think there's a sense that those dynamics and those desires are still present, and so it's not.
Sure, and now there's a template for a path forward, for future constitutions.
Yeah.
Well, Alberto, thank you so much for organizing the conference. It was amazing. Well, the two sessions I attended are very, very interesting. So thank you for that, and thank you for chatting me with today with this wrap up. So I think that helps me actually even understand a bit more perspective about the 2-day event that you would organize.
No, so thanks a lot for letting me do this. All right.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Take care.